An evil eye was said to be cursing the opposing team on the baseball field. In the 1930s, the Chicago Cubs specially hired a wizard. Team owner Philip Wrigley tried everything to break the curse of repeated failures. But he failed again. Soon, however, the heir to the Wrigley gum empire noticed another kind of magic: psychology. In 1938, he hired the psychologist Coleman Griffith, who had studied sports psychology at the University of Illinois. Seen as a scientific freak in the lab, his research was shut down by his alma mater after more than 10 years. Griffith brought a box full of expensive instruments, including high-speed cameras and response timers, to the team's spring training camp. He tried to use science to dissect batting, pitching, throwing, and base running. However, he was not greeted with applause but with cold hostility from the traditionalists. The manager, Charlie Grimm, an old-fashioned baseball man, scoffed at his arrival. He disdainfully called him a head shrinker. In his opinion, victory was won through sweat, guts, and intuition, not a nerd's charts and formulas. He forbade players from watching Griffith's training videos that analyzed their movements. And the 16 detailed reports submitted by Griffith were cast aside. The first head-on collision between science and tradition ended with the complete failure of science. In the middle of the season, finding it unbearable, Griffith reported to boss Wrigley that the team's spring training was aimless, chaotic, and inefficient. The effective practice time per day was only 47.8 minutes, and he accused Grimm of not knowing how to inspire the players' will to win. Meanwhile, the Cubs' standing dropped to 4th, and Grimm was fired. With the friendly cooperation of the new manager, Gabby Hartnett, the Cubs made a comeback in September and kept winning. They miraculously won the National League Championship. Public opinion briefly thought that the magic of psychology had begun to work. But the failure in the World Series broke all illusions. Griffith's honeymoon period with the new manager quickly came to an end. In the annual report, they coldly evaluated each other as neither smart nor willing to learn. The next year, he was marginalized amid endless suspicion and resistance, and finally left in disappointment. He was the first sports psychologist hired by a professional team, and almost the first to be fired. Griffith returned to the university and never worked in sports again. The fire seemed to be extinguished as sports psychology in the United States fell into a 30-year silence. However, the desire for mental magic did not disappear from the arena. It just put on an absurd mask once again. Fast forward to 1950, and hypnotist David Tracy appeared on the front pages of American sports sections. He was not a trained sports psychologist, but claimed that through hypnosis, he could brainwash athletes and improve their performance. The St. Louis Browns, who were at the bottom of the league and desperately seeking a cure, actually hired him. The media took notice and made this farce spread widely. In front of the reporters, Tracy seriously put the players into a trance state, resembling a circus performance. The result was predictable. The Browns' record didn't improve. Tracy soon packed up and left. The only effect was allowing the master to write a memoir to brag about his achievements. But unexpectedly, this farce stimulated serious coaches. If even a charlatan dared to take a share, why shouldn't they go to real psychological experts and try again? Meanwhile, on the other side of the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union was forging psychology into a national weapon. Psychologists led by Avksentij Puni proposed a complete training system called Boyevaya Gotovnost, or combat readiness. It included not only pre-competition confidence building and emotional control, but also the long-term honing of determination, courage, and even patriotism. From junior sports schools to national teams, psychologists became a standard presence. When Soviet athletes were harvesting gold medals like a tide, the Western world finally felt a chill. Driven by this psychological arms race, sports psychology saw a revival in 1965. The first World Congress of Sports Psychology was held in Rome, announcing the official birth of the discipline. The next year, Bruce Ogilvy and other new generation applied psychologists successfully gained access to professional teams. Ogilvy co-authored Problem Athletes and How to Handle Them with a colleague. This made troubled coaches discover for the first time that psychology could be directly used to solve the management problems of team rebels. They were no longer trying to overthrow everything like Griffith, but entered the teams as problem solvers. They taught pitchers to calm their heartbeats through breathing. They also used visualization and attention control techniques, teaching hitters to close their eyes in the waiting area to mentally simulate their swing paths. It was also during this period that a more fascinating psychological phenomenon emerged. Athletes always described a mysterious peak state, the zone. A hot-hitting batter would feel that a 150 km/h fastball looked as big as a softball. The rotating stitching became clearly visible, and time seemed to slow down. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi named this state flow. He found that when challenge and skill are balanced, people enter a state of being oblivious to their surroundings, extremely focused and full of pleasure. This is not a supernatural phenomenon. Rather, the self-monitoring function of the frontal lobe goes temporarily offline. This lets the body be taken over by deeply trained procedural memory, achieving a state of effortless execution. This also explains why the best athletes sometimes commit bases-loaded strikeouts and other low-level mistakes at the most critical moments. It's not because they don't work hard enough. Quite the opposite. It's because they think too much. Under great pressure, baseball players will over-focus on actions that have already been automated and taken over by the body's instincts. They try to use their consciousness to control every tiny muscle movement. This analytical paralysis is the exact opposite of flow. Just like a centipede, once it starts to think about which leg to move first, it becomes unable to move. At this point, the task of sports psychology had become very clear. It should help athletes build a strong inner mind and teach them to shift their focus away from the inner curse of what I should do during a storm toward external goals. For example, letting the batter stare at the logo on the baseball allows the body to take over from the brain again, thus opening the narrow door to flow. Relevant brain imaging studies also provide evidence for this. When star batters face a fast ball, their brains activate more of the areas responsible for automation, rather than using the energy-consuming prefrontal cortex to analyze and judge. The so-called iron will is not just mental strength, but more efficient and energy-saving neural circuits engraved in the brain after thousands of trials and tribulations. However, just as technology was triumphing, a humanistic trend began to return. Before the finals of the 2021 Tokyo Olympics, gymnastics queen Simone Biles withdrew from the competition due to huge psychological pressure. She confessed to the world, "I have to focus on my mental health." Tennis star Naomi Osaka publicly admitted that she had been struggling with depression. The candor of these top athletes broke the ancient taboo that the strong shed no tears, letting the world see the shadows behind the gold medals. The huge pressure brought by professional sports is enough to overwhelm the strongest souls. The role of sports psychology is no longer just about how to win games, but also about treating athletes as whole people and helping them live healthy lives. Psychologists not only help athletes win games, but also help them rebuild confidence in the face of injuries, find their life direction after retirement, and maintain their true selves in the whirlpool of fame and fortune. Finally, let our cameras return to the Chicago Cubs. In 2016, the team plagued by the curse of the Billy Goat finally won the World Series again after 108 years. And this was inseparable from their psychologist, Ken Ravizza, whom the players knew as Master Yoda. Nearly 80 years later, the seeds Griffith planted in that mocked mobile laboratory finally bloomed in the place where he fought. Legendary catcher Lawrence Peter Yogi Berra once said, "Baseball is 90% mental, and the other half is physical." This mathematical nonsense is the soul of all sports, and even life. The game is just a reflection of the grand theater of life, The ultimate goal of sports psychology is for each of us who is trying to win something. Our biggest opponent is never others, but the self who doubts under pressure, retreats in the face of setbacks, or stagnates in comfort. When we finally overcome cowardice, master flow, and break through yesterday's limitations, life is no longer bound by fear.